Hang on. Towson, buddy, for Ravens and all things Vikings. We're headed off to Minnesota, and staying up late in the beginning of the week begins with football and baseball late into the night, and we'll have two games beginning this afternoon. Luke Jones joins us now to talk something that we have not talked about in a week or two, Luke, other than the Orioles, which is baseball. And before I welcome you in and even say anything, because we haven't talked much about the ALDS, the NLDS, the demise of the Nationals, the ouster of the Indians, but I'll say this. I watched this version of baseball, and boy, the Orioles are pretty far away from being this kind of team. I just having watched it for 6 months, the Orioles weren't close to as good as any of these teams.
Well, I'll say that with the caveat. Okay, if you're going to talk about how Justin Verlander pitched on Saturday, then sure. I'll totally agree with that, but we've seen a lot of bad starting pitching in the playoffs. So from that standpoint, maybe not quite as far, but yeah, I mean, when you see some of these terrific starting pitching performances, which there haven't been very many to this point in the postseason, when you see that, then yeah, I agree with you. Beyond that, I mean, some of these teams, I think the Orioles, with a fully healthy bullpen, and clearly they didn't have that with Zach Britton for most of the season, their bullpen stacks up with some of these teams. Their lineup, it all depends on what time of year. If they hit like they did in August, then they can compete. If they hit like they did in September, then they can't. So they clearly have work to do. But unless you're talking about one of the few standout starting pitching performances we've seen, I don't necessarily agree that they're that far away, but they clearly have a lot of work to do this offseason.
Well, the teams that get the best pitching are the teams that win, right? I mean, usually, right?
Well, sure, but like I said, I don't think this postseason's been defined by great pitching necessarily. That's my point. I mean, we've seen, look at the division series. I mean, we saw all kinds of bad starting pitching, and really it was about depth of bullpen. So, I mean, we're preaching to the choir here. We know the Orioles need starting pitching. There's no question about that. But, I'm not necessarily going to sit here and say that I think they're a million miles away from the postseason, because they were just there last year. And if they can find a couple starting pitchers better than what they had this year, which isn't that terribly difficult, I'm not convinced that it's impossible for them to be back in the wild card race next year. So, we'll just have to see how it plays out. But like I said, I think everyone understands they have a lot of work to do. That's stating the obvious.
How about CC Sabathia? What do you make of that effort? Buried, out of the rotation, overweight, arms no good, body's no good. We heard that for years, right? I mean, 14, 15, even into 16. Now he comes back, has this sort of renaissance year, now pitching deep into the postseason and really keeping the Yankees alive on Monday night.
Yeah, I mean, this was a team that was circling the drain when you look at how they fared against Dallas Keuchel and Verlander in games 1 and 2 to come home, which they've been very good at Yankee Stadium. I think Todd Frazier's flick of the bat to right field that got out of the ballpark, as much as we complain about Camden Yards, that's a pretty short porch there. So that's certainly helped them get off to an early lead. But Sabathia has been a nice story this year. I mean, you look at where he's been the last few years. You go back to 2013, 2014, 2015. I mean, the knee was an issue for him. Obviously, his weight has been a story as he's gotten older. I don't think anyone was shocked that would happen. I think anyone who looked at him in 2008, 2009 figured, once this guy hits the wrong side of 30, he's probably going to have some issues.
Yeah, once he gets to be 30, he'll get in shape. Yeah, sure he will.
Yeah.
Once we give him a $200 million, then he'll hit the treadmill in the offseason, right? Like Sid Fernandez did, right?
But that said, despite the fact that, and I mean, CeCe early in his career, I wouldn't necessarily have defined him as overweight or fat then. It was just, I mean, this is a big individual. He's listed at 6'6". I've been in the Yankees clubhouse before in the past. This is a gigantic human being, but then you get older. You don't stay in shape as easily. The knee issue, clearly he had the alcohol issue, so that's another demon that he faces. But you have to give this guy credit. I mean, for all the talk of the Yankees starting rotation and the injury to Pineda and the trade for Sonny Gray, I mean, you look at this guy. He made 27 starts, had a 3.69 ERA. He had a very, very respectable season for someone who's in the November of his career at age 37. So he had a pretty decent outing in the division series. You know, they pulled him pretty quickly against Cleveland when he ran into trouble, but still pitched pretty well. And, you know, I mean, clearly he was staked to a big lead last night, but you know, he took care of business. 6 shutout innings allowed them to rest their bullpen a bit, even though Dylan Betances came in and was a mess again. So clearly they're having their issues with him. But when you get out...
Yeah, just trying to get him right is a big part of this, right? I mean, if this thing gets to a 6 or a 7, you better hope he's right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, because their bullpen's such a strength. I mean, you clearly have Chapman. You have Tommy Canley, who's been so good for them. And Robertson's been good. But, I mean, Betances, the Orioles have seen this firsthand. We've seen this firsthand, how dominant this guy can be and has been for large stretches. But he's had his issues going back to even July. I remember the All-Star game, all the discussion about him having trouble throwing strikes. So they need to try to get him right because he's a weapon. He's one of those guys in that mold of an Andrew Miller who can go in there and give you 2 1/3 innings if you need it on a specific night. But right now, there's clearly no trust with him where he's pitching in the 9th inning of an 8-1 game and gives up 2 walks and I think threw 10 pitches and only a couple of them were strikes. So they're clearly concerned about him, and clearly he's not someone that they've been using in high leverage spots, and that's just going to hurt them because I think we're seeing, even with some of these good starting pitching performances, and Justin Verlander tops the list, what he did over the weekend, but it's all about the bullpens. You have to have 4 or 5 guys who can give you lights out kind of relief work to really give you a great chance to win these games. And we've seen the Cubs on the opposite side of that not really have reliable relief pitching, and the issues they've had in not using Wade Davis on Sunday night. But a team like the Yankees, where they have had a deep bullpen, they could be even deeper if Betances could get himself straightened out. But I'm not sure how many more chances you can give him when, even in an 8-1 game, he's going in there and walking batters, not able to throw strikes.
Hey, man, so with Buck Showalter's pain of last year and obviously what Joe Madden had to defend on Wade Davis the other night one way or another, and now we'll see whether the Cubs can turn this thing around. It's Darvish and Hendricks this evening, and that's a late game. That game's going to start at 9 o'clock at night. I mean, that's going to be 1 o'clock in the morning ending. McCullers and Gray at Yankee Stadium in Game 4 of that series, now 2-1 in the direction of the Houston Astros. All the criticism, and I know we went through the Strasburg stuff last week, and those Yabos down in D.C. were, shooting off their mouths all day about, Strasburg and whether he, had the we haven't even made fun of them yet. We'll get to that later. But it's very tough to be a manager right now because there is no book on this, right? And as much as we'll criticize Showalter or you criticize Girardi, last series about not challenging, although that was more of a, sort of an obvious thing. Even he admitted to that. When it comes to managing bullpens and where these guys are and what's really going through Joe Madden's mind versus what's going through somebody's mind out in the bleachers, I really don't know. Showalter never really explained it, but I'll say this. Greg Olson, the Otter, is my first closer when I had Camden Yards duty back in the 1990s. He was on Facebook, and he's like, you just don't bring in your closer when you're on the run. You just don't do it. It's not the way it's done. Now, that all being said, it creates a hell of an argument this time of the year that, dude, I've been doing this 26 years. I don't ever remember having bullpen arguments in the postseason about managers, but that's where we are because that's the way the game's played now in October.
Well, it just comes down to this. And if it had all been about Wade Davis because he'd thrown 44 pitches against the Nationals in Game 5, which was, last Thursday night, if it had been more about that, I'd hear that, and I know Joe Madden kind of reverted to using that argument when he had his media session on Monday afternoon, then I'll buy that a little bit more. But, it just comes down to this. You can't keep thinking about what might happen in a hypothetical situation. This is exactly what we talked about with Buck Showalter not using Zach Britton in the wild card game. You can either hold on to your best arm and maybe never have a chance to use them and lose, or use your best arm, extend the game, and who knows, maybe your offense in the top half of the following inning, because you used your best arm, maybe they score 3 or 4 runs. And
well, there ain't no tomorrow when it gets to be this time of the year. You can't give a game away in any of these series at any point. You can't. I mean, when it's 8-1, okay, surrender. But when it's when the game's still sitting there, you can't give it away.
Well, it comes down to this, and you know me, I'm more of a sabermetrically inclined individual. I'm not nuts about some of the stats where you feel like you're doing calculus, but look, there's a very simple argument that's made for some of these managerial decisions when it comes to handling a pitching staff, and it goes like this. If we right now eliminated 2 statistics, wins for pitchers and saves for pitchers, how would that change how a manager operates with his bullpen and his pitching staff? I guarantee it'd change a lot. How many times over the years have you heard a manager talk about trying to get a starting pitcher a win? It's a 6-2 game in the 5th inning. It's a guy that's laboring, has given up a lot of base runners, really not all that sharp, and all logic from a simple win the game standpoint would tell you, if you have a fresh bullpen, get this guy out of the game. Instead, because we have this stupid win statistic, how many times do you see a pitcher left in the game too long, gives up some runs, maybe gives up the lead, and then you're taking him out? In the same vein, in the same light, how many times now have we seen it? We saw it with Buck Showalter last year with Zach Britton. We saw it on Sunday night with Joe Madden using John Lackey instead of Wade Davis in a situation that was screaming for your best reliever, and we're hearing this nonsense about it not being a save situation. I mean, I'm sorry. It's lazy managing. And look, I have all the respect in the world for Buck Showalter. I have all the respect in the world for Joe Madden. Their job runs so much deeper than, when do I bring in this pitcher? Do I bunt here? Do I hit and run here? Do I pinch hit here? Do I make a double switch here if I'm a National League manager? They do so much beyond what we see in the dugout from 7:05 until however long a game goes these days. So I fully understand that. But when they start leaning on the save rule and getting pitchers wins and stuff of that nature, it really does come across as any chimp could manage a baseball team. I mean, it's just, there's no thinking involved when you're just using that kind of a cut and dried approach. So, look, even if you use Wade Davis in that spot, maybe he gives up the home run. Maybe you use him and you're only going to use him for 1 inning because he threw 44 pitches a few days earlier. And look, I fully respect that. And maybe you lose, but I'd sure as heck rather lose knowing that I fired my best bullets in a game that I really needed to win rather than saving a guy for a hypothetical situation that may never manifest. And I'll continue to say that. I'll continue to say Buck Showalter was 1,000% wrong last year in the wild card game, no matter what anyone tries to say. And in the case of Madden, if it truly was all about Wade Davis throwing 44 pitches, fine. But he didn't really indicate that. He was talking about saving them for a save situation on Sunday night. And guess what? That never happened, and now you're down 2-0. So, we're married to these statistics that really don't mean anything whatsoever other than it looks cute in the box score. I'd much rather worry about the actual win or actually legitimately saving yourself in a game rather than getting your closer a save.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke at on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST. And, of course, baseball rolls on here all week, 2 games a day here as we get toward the middle of the week. Any global thoughts about who's going to win this thing? I mean, certainly the Yankees punching back on Monday night meant something. And, now the Cubs are going to have to punch back with Hendricks. I feel like the Cubs are in a lot of trouble here, more so than the Yankees, anyway.
I really do. I totally agree with you. And I even, I didn't make an official prediction on Twitter or anything like that, but I had the feeling that the Cubs were in major trouble going into the series. The reason why, I don't think Joe Madden has a lot of options that he can really trust in that bullpen right now, other than Wade Davis. I mean, Pedro Strope's been pretty good for them, but, Carl Edwards Jr. has really struggled. Some other members of that bullpen have struggled. He doesn't have a whole lot of length there. To really, to get from his starter until the 9th inning. He doesn't have a lot of links in that chain that he can really trust, whereas I think the Dodgers absolutely have relievers they can trust. Certainly the Yankees do. Houston, I think their bullpen's a little more vulnerable, but they've had Keuchel and Verlander pitching the way that they have. So, I give the Yankees a little more of a shot, but if you're the Yankees, you got to win. You can't be putting yourself at the mercy of needing to beat both Verlander and Keuchel. I mean, you need to clean up against Lance McCullers this evening, and put yourself in position where the series is even again, because those guys are looming here in the very near future again. So, I like Houston. I think Houston's the better team. I think the Yankees have a better chance, however, than I feel with the Cubs against the Dodgers. I really feel the Cubs are on the ropes. They've got that pedigree. I wouldn't completely count them out because they are the defending world champions, but I just think the Dodgers are a better team. I think the Dodgers have a deeper bullpen at this point. And we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years how much it really does come down to bullpen work. And I just think L.A. is much better position than Chicago at this point in that regard.
Just one little quick point that I'll throw out here is how much the weather has changed in a week, right? I mean, we went from short sleeves in the AL and NLDS throughout, and look, I mean, it's one thing when you got LA in and the sun setting there and all that stuff, but I mean, Chicago, Illinois on Tuesday night, it's going to be 45 degrees. It's we're moving to football weather, and I think we saw that at Yankee Stadium on Monday night a little bit. I think we feel that here in Baltimore as well the last 24, 48 hours, but I've always found that cold really affects baseball players. When it goes from 80 to 50, it affects the games. It affects pitching. It affects hitting. It affects fielding. It affects concentration. It affects the crowd to some degree. I just think the next couple of nights we're going to have the earmuffs on for whatever happens here, and it's going to be interesting to see the way the weather affects it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The crowd's a little more muffled. People are wearing gloves, so the clapping isn't as loud.
It's a little more subdued. Yeah, it's a little more hot chocolate than it is, beer and sausage.
Yeah, but I'll say this. I mean, I think if it favors anyone, I'd say the pitching because, I think it's difficult to hit in cold weather anyway. And we typically see in April the offense isn't there compared to the pitching in some of these cold weather environments early in the season. But now you have that anyway. But in this day and age where you have 4, 5, 6 guys coming out of bullpens throwing 96 or more, I mean, that's just tough. I mean, you're talking about a guy throwing in the high 90s, breaking your bat. I mean, you break your bat anyway. It doesn't feel too good on those hands. You do it when it's 48 degrees. You feel like your hands are broken there. So it's going to be very interesting. But, hey, it's mid-October. I expect that kind of weather. That's October baseball. That's World Series weather. And certainly it feels like after a very mild start, as you pointed out, finally starting to feel like it's going to be fall. And, yeah, it's going to be pretty brisk, pretty chilly at these ballparks the next couple nights.
McCullers and Gray in the early game, Astros and Yankees in the Bronx, and then the evening game starts at 9 on Tuesday night. Darvish and Hendricks, ditto for Wednesday in games 5 and 4. Today it's games 4 and 3. Luke is out in Owings Mills. He'll be out there all week getting you ready for the Vikings and the Ravens, and of course we'll be talking tons about that around here this week as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Don't forget on Friday, celebrating Dundalk Day. I'm entering the Dundalk High Hall of Fame, the only Hall of Fame I'll ever enter. Would love to see everybody out. We're going to have some beer and some crab cakes at Costas right around 7 o'clock on Friday night. If you want to come by and celebrate, feel free to do so. The game is at Dundalk High School. Game starts at 6, so if you're over on the east side, you're an old owl, we'd love to see you. Don't forget, our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Dennis Kalatzos will be here on Thursday driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST and, of course, our WNST text service with breaking news. Comes to you first, spam-free every single time. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. The BuyAToyota.com audio vault is there for you 24 hours a day to listen to anything you may or may not miss here, and you can listen live from anywhere in the world by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Very, very simple game around here, as the coach used to say. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.